Welcome to the Boosted Volunteer Podcast. We share the stories of dedicated Booster Club volunteers and the tools and strategies they use to run successful booster clubs. We also have sought-out experts on fundraising, volunteer management, and running nonprofits to share best practices. Hosted by Robin Eissler and Evan Eissler, you won't want to miss these great episodes that will help you run your booster club like a champ.
Welcome to the Boosted Volunteer. My name's Evan Eissler. I'm joined with my co-host, Robin Eissler. Hi, Robin. How are you doing today?
Good, Evan. Excited to be talking about booster clubs today.
Great to be back with you once again. Today, we're going to be talking about how some of the new and upcoming federal regulations may be impacting your booster club. So there's a whole bunch of regulations at the federal and state level that are in process and may be passed in the near future. And these may have a big impact on schools. And with that, along with that, sports and band and fine art booster clubs. So you may see a large impact in your practices in the near future.
Yeah, there's this big wave of legislation, both at the federal level, talking about changes with the Department of Education, but then at the state level, like in Texas, we've seen a big initiative on school vouchers. And all of these things are going to impact the funding that schools have. And whenever we start talking about the funding that schools have, we're going to need to talk about booster clubs because they tend to make up the difference. So I'm looking forward to this discussion today where we're going to explore this a little bit and talk about why your booster club may be starting to play even bigger role in the students' lives in the future.
So how has the role of the booster club changed and fluctuated over the last few years based on government funding?
Well, originally, booster clubs were created to fund the gap, if you will. So when local communities wanted to put more money into an activity than the government was willing to provide, whether that was the state or local or school district, the booster clubs were created so that the communities could gather and put as much money into that program as they'd like. And so that's what started booster clubs many years ago, and even PTAs and PTOs. And now they've gotten even more important. So that's one of the things that we see when we talk about disparity between high-income areas and low-income areas. They get a lot of the same state funding, but in our high-income areas, the booster clubs are more prevalent and bigger and more fundraise more. And so those programs tend to have a lot of money injected to them. So I think as we look forward, and we see any time funding is going to be reduced, what's going to happen is the gap's going to get bigger. So the role of the booster club is going to get bigger.
Yeah, and as we're seeing now, the likely outcome is many budget cuts for schools in the near future. What specific things might that affect where the booster club needs to step up and raise more money or delegate more money from fun things once to actually things that the players and members require?
Well, it's always a question of where they're going to put the money. And of course, it is a school. So academics tend to take the biggest bite in staffing and requirements that they need with health and disabilities and things like that. So those things are going to take more of a proportionate part of the money. And the things that tend to get cut are the enrichment activities, whether that be the sport or marching band or choir or debate club or FFA or any of those extra activities. The activities that we really think, hey, this is what makes the student school experience worth doing, right? It's not just the English class or the math class, but those things that really add an extra layer to the student's education. And so I know here locally in Texas, we've seen some of the budget cuts already starting, and the very first place is in the fine arts and some of the sports. You can see the first line of cuts is in that area.
How have these economic changes in the past, how have they affected booster club operations? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So generally, booster clubs and nonprofits in general can remain steady through economic downturns. And I think that's because people find this is the time when they really need to support those programs. And in fact, in some cases, like COVID was a good example. In some booster clubs, we saw the support skyrocket because people were worried about these programs and were they going to survive? And so they poured money into them. So while generally you think that when there's a recession and people have less disposable income, they're going to give less, it doesn't always have that relationship. And so you can hold steady that you should be able to continue your fundraising operations as they've been.
And you personally, you had One of the best booster club years ever during
During
COVID.
COVID, yeah, we planned for zero and then we went crazy on our fundraising and really developed a whole bunch of initiatives to give our sponsors a lot of recognition. And it was a time where people appreciated that. And so we got a great return. We had our best fundraising year ever during COVID, but not because we didn't do any work, right? Like we dove in and we're like, we're going to attack this and we're going to make this a successful year.
So you were talking about some of the disparity between high income and low income areas in the booster club and how one of them is going to be a much higher when government funding is reduced. What are some of the things that low income areas are going to be struggling with as they lose government funding?
You know, that's the hard part is those low income areas, if they have booster clubs, they're just not as strong. And that's just a community thing. And so we really see it impact those schools the most where their booster clubs are going to need the most support because they're going to be the ones that are going to be struggling just for the basic needs funding, whereas some of the other areas are going to be able to get all that covered. So it's definitely going to hit the areas that have lower income probably more heavily than it will the other areas. And that's just simply a matter of income disparity.
And some of the things when you have a tighter budget, there's going to be more arguing over who pays for what. Sometimes in the booster club will pay certain things for the coaches and other times not. What are some things that as a board member you might need to think about or prioritize over something else?
Yeah, it's interesting. Booster clubs are independent nonprofits with their own governing boards. However, they have a connected relationship both with the school district and the directors of their programs. And so this is where things start to get really important around budgeting and expectations. So as funding starts to get tight and everybody's looking for ways to keep the program going, I mean, there could be cases like they had to scale back on personnel, so coach got cut. So now can the booster club fund that coaching position? And so those are questions that you'll need to go to your school district and your program director, whether it be your coach or marching band director, and figure out what things the booster club can pay for. So this is really the case where you want to develop and nurture that relationship with your school district people and make sure that the priorities are agreed upon, the budget is set, and everybody's got a plan for how to supplement the program.
And with the booster club contributing more or taking over more responsibilities, I'm sure there's legal things they have to be careful of to not overstep or make sure you're keeping track of the things in the right way. What are some of those things you might need to look out for?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times booster clubs operate loosey-goosey out here and they're collecting money and it's not that big deal. As we see this shift potentially where booster clubs are playing a much bigger role, it's going to be really important to have their legal structure in shape to make sure their 501c3 is in effect, that they filed their tax returns, and then all the way down to can a booster club legally pay the salary of a coach or a band director or those types of things. So you'll want to make sure that you look at your legal and association type rules framework and make sure that you know exactly what you can do so that if there is a bigger shift to the booster club, you know exactly where you can spend the money.
So just thinking about it ahead of time and being prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the most important thing is planning ahead so that you don't get yourself into a pickle. Oh my gosh, we raised money to do this and now we're not legally able to do it. Then you've got a bit of a problem.
And speaking of earlier, your COVID run of the fundraising for the volleyball booster club, what are some things other booster clubs could implement to keep their fundraising going through reduced funding?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is when you're looking at the potential for overall funding sources to go down and the need to fundraise more, what you have to do is prioritize your fundraising. And so you need to look and see what's going to be the biggest bang for your buck. You don't want to fatigue your donors. And that means if you're asking them for money all the time, they're going to get tired of it and they're going to stop donating. So you really need to pick 1, 2, or 3 fundraisers throughout the year, depending on if your program runs seasonally, a couple of months or a whole year. And you need to make those fundraisers have their impact. So you can't miss on fundraising. This is not a time that you can miss on. But what you don't do is be asking for money all the time, because that's just disastrous to fundraising. It doesn't put any urgency behind it, and it doesn't get people excited and get you that kind of snowball effect of fundraising going. So you want to make sure you're choosing your fundraisers really wisely and make sure you're maximizing the results. Like I see people do, we're going to do a meal night at 10 different places, and then we're doing a candy sale, and then we're doing some yard signs, and then we're going to do a car wash. And all those things together are minimal. And then they go try to run a really big fundraiser, an event or something. And people are like, well, we already done all this fundraising. So you really have to strategically plan your fundraising, make sure you're implementing it at the right time, and then making sure you're building urgency behind it to get people involved.
And are there other funding sources that booster clubs might need to be looking into outside of that fundraising if it dries up?
Absolutely. So you've got your general fundraising, which is generally when we would talk about the membership going out and raising money, whether that be athletes or students and that type of thing. You have sponsorships, which is where you can get local businesses involved to buy a sponsorship for your business. And in that case, you really want to set up the framework of those sponsorships to really be giving those businesses a lot of recognition, because in downtimes, they're going to be cutting their budgets. And so you want to make sure that you're giving them a lot of recognition for the dollar that they're spending. And then there's grants. So there's a lot of educational and enrichment activity grants out there with large corporations. If you do some Google searching specifically on your activity, you may find some organizations that will issue grants. So you should have kind of a three-prong approach anyways. You should be looking at those things all the time from your booster club, but this is the time to sharpen the pencil and make the plan even that much more detailed.
And if there is lower funding and bands still exist and all the players still need to fund all their instruments and their uniforms and things like that, how would that affect their families' desire to donate additional money to the booster club?
Yeah, you have to be really careful, because you've always got the year over year needs of the program, things like uniforms and meals and things like that. And then you may be asked to fund additional things, like we said, supplement salaries or things like that. So you want to make sure the basic needs of the program are intact, that they're being met. And you want to be looking at this 2 or 3 years out. So, you're not just fundraising for this year in a booster club, you're fundraising for this year, and you're putting some reserves in for next year or the year after. And so when you set your budgeting up, you want to think, if our total budget for the year is $100,000, but $20,000 this is absolutely what it takes to run a club, then you might want to try to end this year with that $20,000 in the bank. So next year you're ready to go.
And speaking of making preparations, there's never one booster club at a school. There's maybe dozens of them. Is there a way or a recommended approach to work with other booster clubs to fund each other or just give advice or work together to just streamline everything?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can definitely go together to buy things. So any equipment or systems or tools that you're going to use, especially if you're seasonal, you can share across booster clubs. We see that at Booster Hubs. Some of our booster clubs share the credit card terminals. A basketball team will have it in the winter, and softball team will have it in spring, and that kind of thing, as well as concession equipment. We see a lot in the marching bands that they share their props and uniforms. So this is a time to really think about, could we call another school and maybe share those things or share their music that they have for their programs, to look into reducing the cost and how you can maximize the impact with all those things. So definitely coordinate. And it may not be if you're a band program, it may not be the football team at your school, but it may be the band program at the school across town. If you could share and do some resource sharing with those groups, that can really help your funds go a long way. So just being smart about it. And most boosters are frugal and find ways to do things. That's why we're a booster club, right? We got to make things happen regardless of the money. But just things like that, I think if you have that mindset, you'll find opportunities where you go, we could reduce our costs by $1,000 if we did something like this.
And it's good to know you're not doing it all by yourself. There's other people dealing with the same things at the same time.
Exactly.
So what guidance would you give to any new booster club members coming in, maybe stressed out or maybe worried about the new legislation that's going to be passed in the future?
Well, I think There's a few steps you take. So most importantly, right now is the time to get your house in order. Get your booster club cleaned up. Make sure your legal status is good. Make sure your financials are clear and balanced and audited. Make sure you've got a good budget and that you've communicated the budget with all the shareholders, whether it be the members or your directors or your coaches or your school district. Refresh your donor list and make sure it doesn't just have those families. This is a really important time to make sure that your whole community is involved. And so I see a lot of booster clubs get micro-focused on their families that are currently participating. This is where you want to lean on those alumni. You want to lean on local businesses. You want to lean on members of the community who like to engage with nonprofits so that you have a really robust and diverse donor database. And that's going to help in times like these because your families may be impacted so much that they can't pull the strings, but you have local businesses and alumni who know the program's been great for so long. They want to help keep it going. So really focus on your donor list. We talked a little bit about fundraising already. It's going to be really important and it has to have a big impact. So don't wear out your donors. Don't use all your fundraising currency on fundraisers that don't have a big impact. Make sure you plan and get those fundraisers and make them powerful. And then finally, make a plan. So all of this is, you need to have a little bit of strategy now. You just can't go out and buy concessions and hope for the best. You need to be thinking 1 to 2 years out and what sort of things your booster club may be called upon to fund in the future.
Well, thank you so much, Robin. It's always great to hear your thoughts on things. And you have just worked with hundreds of booster clubs every day, and I do as well, but it's just great to hear all the advice you have.
Yeah, this was something that we put in our newsletter this month, and I really got to thinking about it, and it really has the potential to have a very big impact on booster clubs. So I think it's really smart to talk about this in your board meetings and come up with a plan. If your budget needs to grow by 20 or 30 or 50% in the next 1 to 2 years due to funding, you should have a basic strategy on how to accomplish it.
Great. It's always awesome to join you on the Boosted Volunteer.
Well, thanks, Evan. I appreciate you joining, and we'll be talking here in the next week on more Booster Club topics.
Sounds great. I look forward to it.
The Boosted Volunteer is brought to you by Booster Hub. To find out more about Booster Hub and how our app can help you improve communications, increase engagement, raise more money, and manage your booster club responsibly, visit www.boosterhub.com. And then make sure to search for Booster Club Podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Booster Hub, thanks for listening.